And I'll share screen once more. Right, so we're recording tonight, and this recording will be available on our YouTube channel, on the IMC Slack channel, and also the link will be in this weekend's IMC Mass Action newsletter. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to remind everybody of our meeting norms, which should be coming up soon. There, oops, back. Sorry, meeting norms. And we'll go through the land acknowledgement and our agenda. So we assume that everybody on the call has come with good intentions. We've all introduced ourselves on chat. All of the attendees will come in on mute except for the speakers. If you have a question, you can put it in chat. Just type the letters ASK in front of your question so it helps us to find it. All of our resources will be shared in chat. You can click on the link if there's a link, and that page will open up in a separate tab behind your screen. And we'll also be sending all those links in the follow-up email. So we always do a land acknowledgement. This is adapted from one of our racial justice and equity team members, Joan Lester. Wherever you go in America, you are on Indigenous land. Tonight, we acknowledge that those of us who live in Massachusetts are now on the lands of the Mashpee Wampanoag Nation, Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead, Aquinnah, Massachusetts, the Nipmuc Nation, and the native residents of Herring Pond. We recognize their legacy, their ongoing strength, resilience, and their continuing presence. And that's from Joan Lester from the IMC Racial Justice and Equity team. So our agenda for tonight is pretty simple. We're going to introduce you to our Bands Off Our Bodies toolkit, which the team has put together. We put it together, I think, last June when Dobbs was coming out. And it's a resource that you can use and share. And then after we do that, we will introduce our special guests for tonight and watch a trailer of the Jane's film and have a discussion, followed by plenty of time for Q&A. So let me stop sharing. So Lisa's going to share her screen now with our toolkit. The toolkit that we started last June is frequently updated, and it's shareable, and it's always available on this Google Doc. So Lisa's going to tell you about a few of the items now, and then you can look for the link in the chat, and if you want to open it, it will open, and you don't have to worry about losing us on Zoom. We'll still be here. Otherwise, you could just wait for the link to come in the follow-up email. You ready, Lisa?
I am ready. So I'm just going to quickly give you an overview. This toolkit is, I think of it as a menu of actions. There's lots of different things, some quick, some that might take more time. There isn't any expectation people are going to need all of the things on this toolkit. There's just find something that interests you and click on it. The first thing we want to call to your attention is that the Women's March is having a weekend of action, the weekend of October 8th. There are a number of events in Massachusetts. There's a link to their main page, and on our website calendar, we're keeping track of all the events in Massachusetts, some of which aren't listed on the Women's March site. Since the midterm elections are 6 weeks from today, one of the things on the toolkit is a way to find and support pro-choice and pro-democracy candidates. Indivisible Act in one of our local groups has a website where they've got lots of information about candidates in swing states. You can sort by state, you can sort by the type of action that you're interested in. Here in Massachusetts, Reproductive Equity Now and Planned Parenthood have endorsed state candidates, statewide candidates, state legislative candidates. And there are several people who've been very strong pro-abortion activists in the legislature that have tough races coming up. So Reproductive Equity Now is having a call on Tuesday to introduce some of those endorsed candidates and talk about how you can help them. For people who would like to donate money, there's a link to a national list of abortion funds organized by state. those groups basically provide funding for people who need help funding an abortion or to travel for an abortion. We also, as a team, have been working with a group in Texas that has an amazing record of being able to get women who are registered to vote but are infrequent voters to the polls. And so we did a call with them. There's a link to their video, there's a link to their website, and there's a link to donate to them. We also in this toolkit have resources if you know someone who needs help, access to medication abortion, organizations that provide assistance to people. Reproductive Equity Now has put together a great toolkit about abortion care here in New England, and there's groups that do the same thing nationally. So those links are all in the toolkit. If you want to share information on social media or in communication in email or whatever with friends, there's videos. The Boston Red Cloaks, who we've mentioned, have an amazing set of podcasts, and they also have their own social media accounts. We encourage you to check them out. And we've also got some messaging guidance, some of which has graphics, and others are just ways that you can talk to people, your friends, your neighbors, your family about this issue. And if you'd like to work together with our team or with local indivisible groups or either the Red Cloaks or another group that focuses on reproductive rights here in Massachusetts, Mystic Valley Action for Choice, there's information on how you can connect with those. And finally, one of the people that we've been fortunate to work with is Dr. Carrie Baker, who's a professor at Smith and an attorney. She frequently writes for Ms. Magazine, so we've linked some of her articles. Our Greater Andover Indivisible group is going to be hosting her as a speaker tomorrow night, and we'll put a link to how you could sign up for their Zoom call in the chat. And at the very bottom of the toolkit is a little graphic that Lori's put together. We use it as a business card. It provides the link to this toolkit either as the URL or the QR code, and you're welcome in your own communications to copy this link and share it with others. So thanks very much, and hope that it's useful to you and that you find people to share it with.
Great. Thanks so much, Lisa. And thank you for being the keeper of the toolkit as well. So now I'm going to be turning you over to two of the integral Feminist Action Team members, Marcia Goffin and Kathy Walters, who are going to introduce and moderate the discussion tonight with filmmakers Tia Lesson and Emma Pildes, and our real life Jane, Eileen Smith. So Kathy, Marcia, unmute.
Do you have the trailer so that we could use that trailer?
Yes, we do.
That's just to give us a step into the conversation.
Right. Let me see. Lisa, do you have it?
I do have it. Do you want me to show it now?
You're going to have to share screen again, yeah.
Yeah.
We were ordinary women trying to save women's lives, but we were criminals. We were felons. For most of the nation in 72, abortion was illegal. We had to go underground.
The woman would be given the address to the front.
It was probably obvious to neighbors what was going on.
We came to the service from other things, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement.
You couldn't not pay attention to what was going on.
Fetal death is murder.
You could not work as a pregnant woman. If you weren't married, you were out of luck. They were terrible situations.
The septic abortion word was full every day.
Women did awful things. They were literally dying because they were women. So we thought we can be of use. I said, we could use my phone, but change it so that they don't ask for Eleanor. How about Jane? Nobody's called Jane anymore.
We had the phone numbers on bulletin boards around Chicago. Pregnant, call Jane.
The clientele included daughters, wives, mistresses of police, state's attorney, judges.
It dawned on me how big an issue this was. Jane was an outrageous undertaking by a lot of smart women. I was not there to pass judgment. I knew there were women like me. Under the radar of the Chicago Mafia and police department. We were all being watched. The phone rings. A man says, "We know where you are." There were 11 counts of conspiracy to commit abortion. 110 years for each of us. So that's a long time.
That might have ended Jane right then and there.
I couldn't see myself sitting on the sidelines.
We were building a new world, one woman at a time.
Sometimes you have to stand up to illegitimate authority. And sometimes there are unjust laws that need to be challenged.
Thank you.
So in my conversation offline with Eileen, what we came to recognize was how dark a time it truly was. And it reverberates for all of us. I watched this film with a group of women, all of whom recognized in those days, women's sexuality was only a bad thing. Only bad girls had sex. Good girls didn't get pregnant. And so a lot of us didn't understand. We didn't put it together. We had no idea. And so we were aware afterwards of abortion availability, but it was so limited that women didn't have a chance to know, or for those of you who've seen the film, had incredible amounts of money to raise in order to be successful in having an abortion. So it's my great privilege to interview our very own Jane Eileen Smith. And Eileen will talk to you about some of the things that she said in the film, just to refresh your recollection. But she has interesting stories to tell about people who watched the film and who had no idea that was our lives. Eileen, would you unmute yourself and talk?
Sure. It's been interesting to be with different groups of people and see this movie again and see people's reaction. The building that I live in decided to show it, and it was a little bit of more of an older crowd that saw it, and people were so emotional when they saw the movie. And I knew that they all had a story to tell. But afterwards in the Q&A, a 80-year-old man stood up and started talking about how when he was young, his mother had had 3 illegal abortions back in the 40s, that they were dirt poor. He said his father just drank away all their money. His mother was totally not going to leave his father. She begged for a hysterectomy. No one would give it to her. But somehow she related all her stories to this young kid who never told anyone else about it until this night. He stood up and told us about it and said, "This is the first time I've mentioned it." And seeing this movie made me feel my mother was finally heard. And everybody was like just silent in the audience, like, oh my God. And you realized how much people didn't talk about things. It was shame. It was embarrassment. It was just something people kept inside. So I think this movie, I think it's so important that we use our voices to talk about what has happened and what's part of our life. And it shouldn't be a shameful thing. It's just part of our life. You know, what is it? 1 in 4 women have had an abortion or is going to have an abortion. I mean, it's remarkable how many people I know that have never, I have a friend, she's never told anybody, not her husband. She said, don't ever tell him. I'm like, oh my gosh. So it's really remarkable to me, the what it's brought out and the stories that people have had. I can't hear you. Yeah.
Because I muted myself. I would ask you to tell how you first became involved with the whole issue of abortion, and then how you became involved with Jane.
Well, I never really thought about abortion growing up. I never really thought that much even about birth control. You know, it's just, you know, then it was 1968 and, you know, I was here in Chicago and on my own and life was good. And I hadn't really considered it. And then when I was in the dorm after the end of school, one of the women down the hall did knock on my door, and she had had an abortion, an illegal abortion, and she needed help because she was bleeding. And I called the doctor and he told me what to do, go get her ice. And I kept thinking, this is crazy that this woman just had this medical experience. She had to turn to me, who she didn't really know. I just was the person that happened to be there. And I knew that it was wrong, that it was illegal. And I also knew that somehow it was a political issue. But I was involved with SDS, Revolutionary Youth Movement, but no one ever talked about it. And I went to the meeting the next day and said, what about abortion? What about women's stuff? And they were like, it's nothing. They just didn't act like it was important. So that really bothered me and stayed with me. And then a couple of years later, I found myself pregnant. Not any money, in a bad situation with a guy I shouldn't have been with, but stayed with, one-room apartment, really bad job. And I luckily saw an ad in the underground newspaper in Chicago, The Seed, and it said, pregnant, call Jane. So I did. We didn't even have a phone. I had a call from work. And the woman who called me was so kind to me and told me what was going to happen, that it cost $500. I told her I didn't have it. I was going to hang up. She said, how much can you get together? I said $100. And then she said, okay, get that and then pay us back as you go. And I thought, wow. She said, you are going to be blindfolded. You're going to have to be driven to a house. You don't know where you're going to be at. The whole thing seemed very scary. But the counselor called me. I went to her house, played with her kids. She explained everything to me. The whole experience was so positive and so not scary that it just shocked me. So I ended up babysitting for the woman that was my counselor. And I started answering the phones while she was gone. And I could help these people because I'd had an abortion. Plus the book, Our Bodies Ourselves, was right next to the phone. So I'd look everything up for the answers to the question, because it wasn't fair to make them wait for like 6 hours for the woman to come home and call them back. So I started telling them, explaining to them what to do. And they were so grateful. And then I realized I was good at that and I wanted to do it too. So I told the woman I was working for, I wanted to work for Jane, and she was going to lose her babysitter. But that's how I got involved with Jane.
Thanks. Kathy, are you ready to give us the introduction to Tia and Emma?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Walthers from Martha's Vineyard. I'm not sure if this was mentioned previously, but this film did come out this year in 2022. And the directors have said they wanted to tell a historical tale that was important. And they had no idea, I think, how timely it would be. Before the call started, one of the directors told us the film was started in 2016. I'll introduce Emma Pildes first. There you are, Emma, because she was born and raised in Chicago. And I read that there was a family connection to this story. I'm not exactly sure what that is, so maybe you'll share that. Emma's worked at HBO on documentaries about Steven Spielberg, Jane Fonda, Ralph Lauren, and also at PBS, where she's helped produce the American Masters series and more. She has said that she's passionate about using her powers for good. And I just want to thank you for making this film as a way to inspire us today. So we'll hear for a few minutes from 5 to 8 minutes, however long you want to take. Emma, welcome.
Hi. Thank you all for being here. It's nice to hear Eileen talk, as always. Yeah, my family connection to the story is, I don't know how many of you have actually seen the film at this point, but My dad is the radical lawyer in the film. He's in the trailer. You see him for a minute in the trailer as well. And his first wife, Judith, was a Jane. So their son, who pops up in the film as a baby, is a producer on this film as well. He's a producer in his own right in the world. And he started developing this film when Trump got into office. You know, this is a story that was sort of floating around our house for our whole lives. And when Trump got into office, things got uncomfortable in a new way. You know, I'm sure you all know, they've been chipping away at Roe since the decision came down. You know, the Hyde Amendment passed just a couple of years after Roe. So it was a long time coming, but as with so many things, when Trump got into office, it got scary in a new way, in an acute way. And he got to work packing the courts. And, you know, we saw an opportunity to harness this story that was in our home and hopefully give these women a platform to bear witness and tell the world what this country looked like the last time women didn't have a right to choose. So thanks to HBO and their generosity and their pure heart and ethos over there, they greenlit this film, and we were able to make it and, you know, bring this incredible women's stories to light. So that's the tale. That's what got us here.
That's great. Did you have a hard time finding the women in the Jane Collective and getting them to agree to be on this? I mean, you really had, I don't know how many of them, were quite a few.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely a funny mix. Some of the women, you know, had never met. Some, you know, you have Heather Booth at the very, very beginning, who was sort of the founder of this. And then women 5 years later that are still working in the service, who have never met each other. So that was an experience of them coming together. You know, they've done, as Eileen is doing now, you know, a lot of Q&As, but a lot of the women stayed close. I mean, this was a very formative experience. I think Eileen can speak to that more, but a very formative experience that changed a lot of their lives. And I think cemented relationships for them, sisterhood for them, and stayed very close. So, you know, we had Judith, and she was still friends with many of the women, and they were friends with each other, and it all sort of came together. You know, I think these are really brave, moral individuals, and that came into play in the 60s when they did this work. And I think it came into play again when we asked them to sit for this film. It's a brave thing to do, to sit in front of a camera and talk about the illegal activity, very controversial illegal activity that you did 50 years ago. But they were bold and they were brave again, and they saw the value of this and were willing to sit in front of the cameras. So came together pretty quickly, even in the middle of COVID.
Oh, it was in COVID that you did this?
For some of them, yeah, some of the interviews, yep.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I'd like to introduce Tia now. And Tia has a long and successful and celebrated career as a documentary filmmaker, the co-director of this film. The list of films that she's been involved with include Fahrenheit 9/11 and Where to Invade Next, both with Michael Moore, Troubled Waters about Katrina, Bowling for Columbine, and Citizen Coke, that's K-O-C-H, and a dozen more. I met Tia this summer when I first saw the film when she brought the film to Martha's Vineyard, the film festival. And it was pretty devastating to watch this because Roe had just almost a week before, I think as we were sitting there and watching the movie build toward passing Roe, and we were sitting there and just had lost it. I think when Tia came up, she said this was the first time she'd seen her own film since the Roe decision. And she said that she was almost speechless. She really, just starting. So I'm curious, as you talk about making the Janes, Tia, what do you hope to do with this film? And from your travels around the country, how do you see women coalescing around this issue today? And welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. And thanks for having us on tonight. Do you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, look, it is quite lucky that we're out here with this film, because I think Eileen, myself, and the rest of the Janes and Emma and the whole film team would be out in the streets getting arrested if it were not for this film. But we've been able to harness some of our outrage and our energies and put it into, getting this film seen far and wide. And we had quite a coup with HBO. It is now being broadcast and available to 70, 80 million subscribers around the country and around the world. And we are also doing an engagement campaign around the film. In particular, right now in the fall, with headed towards the November elections, we are focusing on screenings in the battleground states, in the states that are really going to decide on the state level and the national level what the atmosphere for the environment for reproductive justice will be in the coming months and years. And so we are offering this film up to groups. In some cases, we're subsidizing their screenings. We're bringing Janes and filmmakers together, either by Zoom or in person, and showing the film in Texas, in Michigan, in Virginia, in Washington State, in Wisconsin. One of the, I think, the powers of this film is, as Emma said, is showing really quite vividly what it looked like, when there was no federal protection for abortion rights. And, I was thinking the other day that we really have had very little imagery, popular imagery to represent that era. We've had the coat hanger. I mean, that's pretty much it. And I think it was important for us to, excavate this history a little bit and to supply in popular media some of the images. We found extraordinary footage of the raids of abortion clinics all over the country, and abortion providers going to jail, losing their medical license, women they were serving, also doing perp walks and being stigmatized and having their names in newspapers. But even more awful, we saw footage of the septic abortion wards and women dying, paying the ultimate price for this lack of access to this basic medical procedure. So we, in addition to watching these extraordinary women band together, to resist, to pull together to save women's lives and to provide a decent alternative to the mob and other really very sketchy abortion providers at that time. I've lost my train of thought. These women were an inspiration. And so we wanted to both show the tragedy and the horror, that in that time period, but also this expansive, generosity of spirit and the risks that these people were willing to take, really long time in jail, not to mention sacrificing, a lot of time and doing it, for no money, but really they changed people's lives and for the good. And overall in the 5 years that they were in operation, they served about 11,000 women. which in some ways was a drop in the bucket given the need at that time. But for those 11,000 women, it made all the difference in the world. In some cases, probably made the difference between life and death. So we are very excited to be out here with this film. If any of you know, I saw Carla, you're doing work in Texas with an alliance in Texas. If they want to screen the film, please chat at me and let me know your email address so I can reach out. If any of you know folks in battleground states that want to screen this film, we want to serve it up. And what we want to really do with the film is to register voters and to inspire voters to get out to the polls this November.
That's great. When you said you're looking back at the history and not much had been told before, I felt so privileged just to be able to see women's history told. I mean, we just don't see that often. We don't, not only has abortion not been talked about, but some of the scenes in there, just to going back and even seeing the women's movement, seeing these women involved in these other groups and them not caring, as Eileen mentioned earlier. So I really appreciate seeing this from a women's point of view. And I just wonder how many other stories do we not know about? And I was wondering what surprised you in making this film?
I mean, there were a lot of surprises. The fact that the Chicago mob, operated or facilitated abortions in the city of Chicago, for sure not for good. They were trying to monetize and profitize off of abortion bans, and that women really had very little choice other than, if they were lucky enough really to find the mob. Many of them couldn't even find that resource, and had to self-induce or were forced into childbirth. So that, I guess, was a big surprise, that's how desperate people were, that the mob was a good option before the Janes came along. I think seeing, I think the fact that there was just this atmosphere of non-judgment around these choices that women were making, that the Janes had this ethos of, they were there to serve. They weren't there to interrogate. They weren't there to force, their clientele to justify their choices. In a time when this procedure was so stigmatized and women's sexuality, women's bodies were not, were stigmatized. The Janes were a really bright spot. So that, to me, maybe it wasn't surprising, but it was definitely heartening as a filmmaker.
Definitely inspiring. Thank you. We have a lot of questions, so I think we'll open it up to questions. And I think, Lori, either you or Lisa were doing the questions?
Yep.
Okay.
I've been writing them down. I think that some of them are logistical. Amy and Judy's the regional indivisible coordinator, wants to know how to get in touch if they have contacts in battleground states for you. Amy says has someone in Washington, and Judy, I would imagine, has them in several states.
I'm putting the website in the chat, that has a request to screening form. Wait, stop. And you can go to that website. It has resources, toolkits, but also a button that says request a screening. And if it's in a battleground state, we'll follow up in one way. And we're also obviously eager to do screenings elsewhere as well, but we're really prioritizing and helping to fund the battleground state screening. In terms of colleges, I saw a note about colleges. There are, we are doing screenings in colleges and universities all over the country. It's very exciting to watch young people see this film. And so that same thing, go to thejanesfilm.com and we can connect you with the folks that are offering up the educational screenings.
Great. Lisa, do you have a question for
The first couple of questions were related. One person said, I'm horrified I have to ask this. Do we need to start doing this again? And a related question, do you think we'll have to go back to the Jane's phone system?
Maybe that's Eileen.
That would be really hard. Things would be really different now with cell phones and texting and everything like that. You know, hopefully we won't. I think there'll be some level of involvement of people helping women get access to abortion, the pills. Mostly it's going to be at this point still, I'm seeing most people are helping people find ways to get to an abortion and finding money to help those people. I mean, that's what's happening now. Down the line, you know, it's going to be, we'll have to see how this goes. I mean, I think people are doing some planning that maybe this would have to happen on some level. It would be really different. Things seem a lot meaner now, or a lot more intense. Also, I think we did get away with a lot because people underestimated us. They didn't think that there'd be a bunch of women doing this. Now they know women can do a lot of damage. You know, that would not work in our favor, actually. So
I think a question just came in, another one for you, Eileen. How did the Janes learn to perform abortions, and how did you find the courage to do that?
Well, one of the people that were doing the abortions, who we thought was a doctor, it turned out he wasn't a doctor, but he did perform very safe, good abortions. When we found out he wasn't a doctor, many conversations went on, and a couple of the women were very strong in talking to him about what was going to be next. And he agreed to train them. I mean, he had learned from a doctor, so he knew how to train somebody, and that it was a very trainable skill. So he trained the first couple people, who then went on and trained other people.
I would say I was very surprised at that part in the film when that happened, because I think even today, there's a mystery, a mystique that sort of surrounds this whole procedure of abortion that most people are not aware of and aren't really open to learning about anyway. But that was a very interesting moment in the film when everybody was like, wait, Dr. Mike is not a doctor?
Yes, it was shocking. And you know, that was a...
Sorry, go ahead, Eileen.
I was just going to say, and those were DNCs that we were doing, which, you know, now the procedures are even safer.
Right.
So it's even an easier procedure, and yet they're not even teaching it. And it's harder for people to get, you know, doctors to even get the skills now. It's ridiculous and horrifying.
Yes, agreed. Emma, you were going to say?
Well, I was just going to say it's also different because we have the abortion pill now, which is a huge advancement, and, you know, could turn into a disastrous situation if that starts being sold on the black market. But for now, it's extremely safe, and that's a game changer. You know, to quickly go back to, you know, what are the things that surprised us or revelation moments when we're making the film. But, you know, when you really sit and think about how simple and safe the procedure actually is, and how many women were injured and died, you have a reckoning with the notion that it's because people didn't care enough to do it safely and carefully. And it's a decision to do that, to be reckless with the procedure. It's not that they were trying to do open heart surgery and weren't up to the task. It's a relatively safe procedure if you take the time to care about women's lives and see women's lives as valuable and not something to make money off of, or sexually assault, or all of the different scenarios that happened. So sort of like really sitting down and realizing that for me was something to face, I think, in the making of the film.
That's a very nuanced and very important point. I think that we don't consider, because we do know it's simple. And I don't know why, maybe that's why they've wrapped it all up in this mystique, so that you have to have a doctor put the abortion pills into the hands of the patient. And well, until recently, but yeah, that I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah.
And the image of the septic abortion wards, I did not know they existed. Did they exist everywhere? Did you find out? Yes, they were in every town.
They were in every major city in the country, in public hospitals, mostly, because those were the dumping grounds for women who had had infections or injuries as a result of, inducing abortions. And, many women survived, many women died. We don't know how many, because those death certificates weren't always accurate. But with the doctor that we interviewed in Chicago, he called the morgue himself many, many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
So this is for a procedure that is safer than a colonoscopy.
Yes.
But because, when we all know very clearly that when abortion is criminalized, it doesn't mean that women stop having abortions.
Right.
They have them, they just don't have safe ones. And that's what we saw very clearly. And the after Roe v. Wade was handed down, after the decision, those septic abortion wards were unnecessary. They closed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hope we don't see them coming back again. At least we know better now, and maybe our voices will make a difference there. There's some more questions, and it has to do with where and how difficult was it for you to get the footage of not just the septic abortion ward, but of the police arresting the women and all of that old footage?
Yeah. Well, Tia and I both have a long history working with archive. So it wasn't easy. I would not go so far as to say that, but we had a leg up. We had a skill set in place to do the digging, and some things came easier than others. Some things we came across, and were sort of gifts from the gods. I'll tell you one passage that was not difficult to find in the film. The women are talking about that in the anti-war movement, there wasn't a place for women, that they were sort of relegated to helper roles. And we thought, I wonder if we could piece together a quick montage of loudmouth men in the anti-war movement. Well, that came together quite fast. That footage was readily available and not difficult to find. We whipped that up in 20 minutes or so. So some things were trickier than others to find. But I mean, archive is really a joy for both Tia and I. And so all of that, as excruciating as some of it was to look at, some that we didn't even include, it was an education for sure.
Will you do more films like this to expose those loudmouth men?
Make like a 5-hour
yeah.
But it was very important for us to show, these women came from the civil rights movement. They came from the anti-war movement. They were activists in the student movement. And had both the training on the ground, tactical training, but also the principles and the values that came from that kind of resistance. And they were being given, as Eileen said, as short shrift. Their priorities and their needs and their calls to action weren't being heeded. And so they came to, rather than complaining about it, they just came together on their own to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Right. Lisa, did I miss questions? Are there others?
Well, there was a question early on about whether anybody served prison terms, either among the Janes or if you heard of people, or if the Janes were aware of people serving prison terms for the kind of work that they were doing in Chicago.
Eileen, you wanna?
Not that I know of. I mean, none of the Janes did. The women that were arrested, the case was dismissed after Roe versus Wade passed. So luckily, no. And I had not heard of anything. And I think we would have, but.
No, there were people, we found a lot of newspaper articles. No, people did, doctors served jail terms in Illinois, elsewhere in the country. They had their licenses taken away. But the threat of that was always sort of hanging over them. It wasn't like today where women were necessarily themselves serving time, though they were, the threat of that was enough to, give in some names. But there were a number of very famous cases in Washington, D.C. and Minneapolis where providers were giving essentially medical care to their patients and landed in jail. And the medical care involved terminating a pregnancy, an intended pregnancy that was, had complications. So I don't know that, I think it varied from locale to locale, but none of those laws were actually as punitive or as harsh as we're seeing today in these states around the country. Where they're looking to prosecute people for crossing state lines.
Yeah. And there's, as many of you know, there's more of these laws coming down the pike. And yes, in these midterms coming up in November, there's 5 states with abortion on their ballot measures about abortion on the midterm November election ballots. California, Michigan, Kentucky, Montana, and Vermont. And then there's others coming after November. Some of them wish to codify the right to an abortion, and others, of course, want to install harsher terms or completely outlaw it. There was one other question, and it was, do any of you know whether there were other Jane-like organizations in other parts of the country?
Well, I know in California, there was a group that was doing menstrual extractions. And I'm sure that was one group that we really knew of because we did have some interaction with them. And I'm sure there were others that did similar things, but that's as far as, I never heard of anybody else. And I kept thinking somebody might come out of the woodwork with the film and go, hey, we did this in, some other state. I mean, has anybody contacted you about that? Or
no, but
there's one person possibly on this call whose mother worked with that church organization that you mentioned in the film, and I don't recall the name of it.
The clergy consultation service.
Yep.
Yeah. But I don't know where that was, what state it was.
That was nationwide for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
They weren't actually giving abortions, but they were mainline Protestant and Jewish religious leaders who were ministering to women and referring them to abortion providers and vetting those providers, and also helping to transport people from states where abortion was illegal to states where it was legal.
Yeah. Okay, so a few more questions have come in. When you spoke with the doctor who appeared in the film, right? Did you speak to him about how he, felt that abortion laws needed to change? And, obviously he had some sympathy. And did he have any views about what's happening today?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we found him was Googling around on the internet, trying to find people that were witnesses of the septic abortion ward from a medical perspective. And we found him because he wrote a short piece online. I can't remember for what publication. And he was talking about how it seeing that changed the trajectory of his life, certainly of his career, but also of his life. He became an OBGYN, and we'll never forget the horrors that he saw and how unjust it all was, how clearly unjust it all was. And so he feels very strongly, of course, about what's going on now and the struggle in between then and now. So yeah.
Golly. Other questions, Lisa? Did you see any?
Parmalee asked a question, why do we think the laws are more draconian now?
Well, I'll speak to that since I made the comment. In Texas and Oklahoma, they're incentivizing family members and coworkers and neighbors to turn in anybody they think or suspect facilitated an abortion. And when I say incentivizing them, that means that they are offering up to $10,000-$15,000 if you turn in someone who indeed, is, what do you call it, is part of the conspiracy, so it's, that never was a thing. And a lot of these states are adopting that framework for the legislation they're passing. As we all know, many of these states are not carving out exceptions for rape or incest or the emotional well-being of the mother. So that, there's a lot of and when I said they were looking to prosecute people who are crossing state lines, there are doctors in New York who are being advised not to travel to the South, not to go to Texas, abortion providers here, because they may well be arrested when they go to Texas or Oklahoma or in Indiana. I mean, the list is getting bigger and bigger. Wow. And there are legal defense funds being set up all over the country to raise money in case of prosecution. Also, I guess we have the ability, prosecutors have the ability to find people much more easily. They can look at internet searches. They can, get discovery from internet providers and find, geolocate your tracking your location in your phone. How close were you to an abortion clinic in New Mexico?
Right.
That's technology that exists and certainly could potentially be used to prosecute.
Wow. Yes. I think there's one last question. Is it possible to find a list of hospitals that had septic abortion wards?
I don't think we didn't. Sorry. Go ahead, Tia.
Well, I know there was, New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, D.C. I don't know about Boston, but I know, we know those cities for sure because they, there's articles about that and eyewitnesses who worked there.
We didn't see a comprehensive list. I'm sure if somebody did the research, it could be pulled together. But as Tia said before, it's hard to do research on this. It's spotty, and there's a lot of reasons to not keep meticulous records.
There's a terrific book by a professor at the University of Illinois called When Abortion Was a Crime. It looks specifically at the state of Illinois, but there's detailed information, back, she goes back a century and looked at the evolution of the abortion ban in the state of Illinois and the widespread impact, including the septic abortion wards.
Wow. Okay, we are approaching the 8 o'clock hour. We could probably go on, but we won't. I'm just putting some reminders on the screen for everybody. Our toolkit is at a bit.ly link, bit.ly/row toolkit, but we'll provide the link to you later. And here's how to join our team. We meet pretty regularly, 4 p.m. on Fridays on Zoom. And you can always go to the Indivisible Massachusetts Coalition website and check out our calendar or sign up for our newsletter. There's a link for the Women's March event. There's where the states where the ballot measures are. Any other things that came up during the call we'll put together in an email to you. But mostly I want to thank Tia, Emma, and Elaine, and to all of you for coming to take part in this conversation. The Janes offers us a window into our past, but it's also a cautionary tale. Our struggle is ongoing and universal, and we are seeing it in Iran right now. And we have to remember that if we work together, we do not have to go back, and we do not have to be silent, and we cannot be silent in the face of those who would rather see us go back. We will not be silent. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you for making this film, Tia, Emma, and Elaine. Thank you.
Thank
Eileen,
you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.